Number 1.
Hunting is an avid hobby of mine, and it runs in my family. My favorite animals to hunt are deer and boars, as they are quite a challenge, and I love a challenge. I also love hunting in general and camping in the woods. It's therapeutic for me, as you're in nature's natural habitat, which can be greatly appreciated when you're by yourself. Accompanying this are the type of people you meet while hiking. I have met people who have shared their food and campfire with me, but most of the time it's your animal friends who accompany you. I wish this story was all about that, but things took a turn for the worst. I had recently completed an assignment which I would describe as long-winded and quite boring, even though it was my favorite topic, human biology. Due to this, I decided to take a 5-day hike across a vast stretch of woods that were brilliant for hunting. As a hunting enthusiast, I decided to hunt for some deer and possibly some boars if I came across any. So I prepped my water filter, packed my tranquilizer and hunting equipment, as well as my pop-up tent and some snacks. I took the 3.5-hour drive to my destination. I was stoked, as I could unwind around nature and enjoy the atmosphere the woods provided. I arrived at what looked like an abandoned parking lot around 3:30 p.m. All of the bays were empty, and the ranger's office looked as if it had been unoccupied for years. I brushed it off, parked, and began my hike. The place gave me a very uneasy vibe, as if the woods beyond the ranger station were kind of sinister. I can't really describe what gave me this uneasiness, but I honestly just chalked it up to the place being abandoned and creepy. Either way, I headed out onto the path and began scouting the area for animals. These woods were quite exquisite. The sun was shining through the trees, and the animals were up and active. I came across a few deer, but no boars unfortunately. Fast forward to 8:30 p.m. It was uneventful, and it was getting pretty dark. Now I need to add that I'm quite a paranoid guy, as I was robbed at the age of 15, and even though all was okay in the end, that paranoia of something or someone lurking in the shadows stayed with me in the back of my mind, and especially makes itself known when I'm out alone at night. Anyway, I whipped up a fire, cooked up some marshmallows, and warmed up some beans, minding my own business. After this, I decided to go on a late-night hunt, as I did a 2-week course on how to hunt prey in the woods when it's dark, and I think it really paid off. 15 minutes later, I put the fire out as I prepared to leave, but then my blood ran as cold as ice, and my hands started to shake when I saw the silhouette of a person about 100 meters away from me. It was unexpected, so I internally freaked the fuck out. As well as this, I noticed a knife in their left hand, and it looked like they were crouching and stalking something, as they had their knife at the ready. I believe it was a man about 6 foot tall, and his back was facing me, so I believed that he didn't notice I was there. After shitting bricks while watching this man for about 5 minutes, he disappeared into the inky night. I got over it pretty quickly. I figured it was just another hunter like myself. I honestly wished that was the case. Fast forward about an hour. It's around 9:45 p.m., and I'm feeling confident enough to go back out and into the black wilderness and catch a deer or two, or maybe even a boar. I pinpointed where my tent was on the map and went on my way with my hunting equipment. 10 minutes later, I'm practically in no man's land. Everywhere around me was pitch black, but I knew what I was doing. I was stalking a deer, which had noticed me and was about 50 meters in front of me, just wandering around. I grabbed my tranquilizer and placed the deer in my sights. That's when I heard a twig snap. My eyes darted, my legs turned into jelly, and I jerked my neck towards the source of the noise. There was a fucking silhouette that appeared out of a tree to the left of me, about 50 yards away, and just watched me. Not the deer, but me. His size told me that he was the same guy from before. 6 foot, roughly 200 pounds. He stared at me, and I stared back. My body was still as a stone, but a sudden outburst of adrenaline was causing me to shake. I couldn't see his face, as it was too dark. Fuck. Was he some kind of late-night human butcher? Will I ever see daylight again? I just about choked out. Who's there? I tried to say it in the calmest voice I could, but the fear was obvious in my voice. The man raised his hand with the knife and pointed his index finger at me. That was it. I fucking bolted it. Almost tripping myself up and hitting my head on some tree branches. Twigs snapped rapidly behind me. The son of a bitch was chasing me. I looked back once and saw his right hand brushing tree branches to the side of him, his knife gripped tightly in his left hand. I then realized that I dropped my tranquilizer. Fuck it, I can buy another one. I know I should have just shot the guy, but it's amazing what one can forget in a horrifying situation. Even if it's a gun, I wasn't going back for it. A ton of thoughts were going through my head while I was fleeing. Why me? What does he want? Money? Food? That was when I honestly thought I pissed myself, as he said in a rapid tone,
"Isn't this fun?"
He then had the audacity to start laughing in a patronizing way, and I couldn't take it anymore. I sped up, and let me tell you, it's amazing what the human body can do when adrenaline and instinct takes over. I've never ran so fast in my life. I made a hard right, dived into some nearby bushes, and eventually lost the guy. I heard his footsteps go in the opposite way, and it turns out that I went in a huge fucking circle, as I could see my tent, about 50 meters away. I was fucking shaking, and tears were starting to form, but I stayed strong. I tuned in my ears to the inky blackness, and I heard nothing. I saw nothing. I was not going to turn on my phone light, as it would make me a visible target. I carefully made for my tent and checked my watch. It was now 10:30 p.m. I sat still in my tent, listening to every small noise I could from the woods. I held my breath as I heard a twig snap behind me, and with that, it was accompanied by a low, sinister voice.
"You think you could run? I win."
With that, my tent was sliced open, and the fucker popped his head in. He was fucking licking his lips, and his eyes were wide open and locked with mine.
"You lose,"
he screamed as he pulled out his knife. Fighting was not my strong point, but going to the gym made me a pretty able guy. So as he tried to stab me, I grabbed both of his arms and fended off him plunging the blade into my torso. I tried to disarm the fucker, and he laughed during the process. I thought he was trying to intimidate me. However, I was ready to kill him to defend myself. I restrained his left wrist, but his knife was inches away from going into my foot, so I stepped onto his right hand and pulled back on his left wrist. Then, snap. His left wrist was broke. He let out a blood-chilling scream. I now had the upper hand, and I took advantage of it. I got the knife from his shattered hand and gave him a taste of his own medicine. I sunk the knife deep into his right hand, and he screamed. I landed a few punches, and I think I broke his nose. I grabbed my arm in pain as he fought back and bent it in an awkward position, but I honestly couldn't afford to care about my injuries. He tried to kick me, but I punched him in the face until he was unconscious. I then checked my phone. No service. I picked up the fucker into a fireman's lift, and I remembered my way to the ranger's office, as it was exactly west from my tent. After an hour of struggling with a potential killer on my shoulders, I found the ranger station, and to my surprise, a young man, around 20 years old, was there. I collapsed onto my knees, and I explained the situation. And as it turns out, the guy had slashed my left bicep, but the adrenaline numbed me to the pain. The ranger called for backup. I don't know how long it took. I left my belongings. I was not going back up there to retrieve them. The ranger offered to drive me to the nearest hospital in my car, and I did. I took him up on his offer. The nightstalker was taken away, semi-unconscious. The next day I woke up on a hospital bed to an officer sitting next to it, and what he said next was burned into my memory, never to be erased. When I first saw the killer, his back was towards me, knife in his left hand, and was crouching as I mentioned earlier. It turns out he was stalking another hiker, who he brutally murdered and mutilated. They found chloroform at the scene, hence me not hearing any screams or cries for help. I vowed from then onwards to never go hunting by myself again. The next time I went hunting was 6 months after this incident, with 4 other friends. Although the woods can have a beautiful atmosphere, never judge a book by its cover, as the tables can turn within the blink of an eye. For all of you going camping and hunting, stay safe, and remember, don't think these things can't happen to you.
Number 2.
This did not happen to me, but to my boyfriend a few years back, and I decided to share his experience. We used to live in a small farm town, where the largest store to visit was Walmart, so often we would want to buy clothes and other things like that. We had to drive an hour to a larger city, where there were malls and other options. One day my boyfriend, we'll call him Carl, and his friend Edgar, and Edgar's little brother Fabio decided to head out to the city and go to the mall to buy some clothes. They decided to head out around 6 and jumped in Edgar's car and began the drive. Not even 30 minutes into the drive, the car starts to make a weird noise and started to smoke, so Edgar pulled the car over to see what was going on. Now keep in mind that this road is completely isolated and only has one gas station near the entrance of our town, but other than that, it's just empty countryside. After checking the car, they decided there was nothing they could do about it and would have to call for help. Now at the time, none of these guys had phones, so that meant hiking back up the road to the gas station, which would take about an hour or more to get to. Edgar tells his little brother just to stay behind and wait in the car, while they went to the gas station. His brother was only 12 years old, so probably not the smartest idea for him, but I guess in their minds it was okay. Anyways, Carl and Edgar began the hike up the road and decided that if they cut across some fields, they would reach the gas station in half the time, and after quite a bit of walking they arrived at the gas station and used the phone to call Edgar's dad. Of course, his dad was angry that the car was in bad shape, but was even more pissed that Edgar had left his little brother all alone. He told him and Carl to head back to the car and he would drive down the road and meet them there after work. So they hung up, thanked the guy at the counter, and head out on the long walk back to the car. By this point, it was dark, and when they arrived, they were exhausted and just ready to go home. They walked up to the car to get in, and they noticed that Fabio was gone, and the front window had been smashed open, and glass was everywhere. Carl and Edgar both began to freak out and yell for his brother while looking around the area to see if anyone was nearby. The two of them both began to freak out and yell for his brother while looking around the area to see if he was anywhere nearby. They decided to turn on the car so that the headlights would illuminate the street and hopefully help them look to see if they could find his little brother or what may have caused the damage. They soon heard the sound of a car coming up and turned around to see Edgar's dad pulling on the side of the road beside their car. Once he found out that Fabio was missing, he began to freak out as well. They were so busy being frantic that they didn't notice someone was walking towards them from the direction Edgar's dad had just come from. It was Fabio. He was confused and wondering why everyone was yelling, and they explained because they thought he had been kidnapped. Fabio was surprised to see the window was broken since the car had been in perfect condition when he had headed to the gas station to get something to eat. Edgar and Carl then realized that that was why they never encountered him, since he had taken the main road. Things quieted down as the guys started to inspect the engine. It was only then that they began hearing a rustling noise. Everyone went quiet and listened. Edgar's dad yelled for whoever it was to come out. He grabbed the tire iron and handed Carl and Edgar 2 other random tools to hold on to as he walked towards the brush. It was then that a stranger emerged from the leaves. He was tall and skinny, and by what Carl told me, He looked to be strung out on some type of drug, with bloodshot eyes, and his movements were just off. Edgar's dad asked him what he was doing out there, to which he replied, "Out for a walk." Edgar headed over to the stranger and started yelling at him for breaking into his car. The guy became very defensive and started yelling back about how he didn't do it. At this point, Carl was still across the street with Fabio when he noticed more movement in the brush. And as he looked closer, he noticed that there was another guy and girl trying to sneak behind Edgar and his dad. It looked like the girl was carrying a large bag and the guy a long pipe. Carl cried out to Edgar and his dad, and they quickly turned around to see the two people just crouching down behind them. Carl said he wasn't quite sure what happened. Next, since it happened so fast, but a fight broke out between everyone. As the scene unfolded, Carl was still beside Fabio and the car and was getting ready to join in, when everything went silent. It was then they noticed that Edgar had a gun pointed at his face from the drugged out guy who was just shaking and stammering that they would shoot them. He kept pointing the gun first at Edgar's face, then his dad, and then back again. He told them that they would let them go and not follow them, or else he would shoot the both of them in the head. He and the two others walked across the street and into the field, disappearing into the darkness. Edgar and his dad were bloody from the scuffle and told Carl and Fabio to get into his car and that they would come back tomorrow to fix the engine. Everyone piled into his car and they took off. Carl said that the car ride home was silent. Now I asked him if Edgar's dad ever called the cops, and he said to his knowledge they never did. Carl was dropped off at his house around 1 a.m. and called me right after that. I remember thinking how close he had been to never coming home. Carl thinks back to that day sometimes and thinks about how lucky he is to have survived. That year there were a lot of car break-ins, and we all wondered if it was the same group of people. I guess we'll never know.
Number 3.
This story is from the point of view of a female. A few years ago, I held 2 jobs, one at a taco place, the other at a small general store. The taco place was always busy. We were separated from the customers by a counter, which was about elbow height. Interactions with customers was pretty much kept to a minimum, so we could be fast and focused on making food and moving on to the next customer. Working at the general store was a lot different. It was much slower paced, except around noon, when every old person in town wanted to shop, it seemed. I usually worked nights at the general store, and days at the taco place. The work at the general store consisted of cleaning and unpacking boxes to stock the shelves, and the majority of my chores didn't involve me being behind the counter. This led to a lot more interaction with the customers in a more friendly environment. It was here that I had the encounter with the crazy man. He was a bald white guy somewhere in his 30s or 40s. Since I didn't have a car, I was getting rides to my college on the other side of town by my boyfriend, who is now my husband. The first time I saw this creep, he was walking along the sidewalk, blindfolded. It was a busy road with lots of traffic, and he had on a fucking blindfold. I guess he thought he was cool or something by showing off his ability not to stumble and die, but he just looked like a crazy person. When my boyfriend couldn't drive me, I had to walk. It was only a couple blocks from my apartment, so it wasn't too bad. The only time I had to walk in the dark was at the end of a closing shift, so I was never too worried. One day I was working at the taco place, and the blindfold man tries to talk to me. I brush him off and get back to work, helping the next customer, only giving him a brief comment and then dismissing him. Apparently this made him mad because he stuck around, hoping that work would slow down, but it didn't. I didn't see him again until a few days later. He came into the general store, wearing the blindfold again. He took it off to shop, and then came up to the register to pay. He didn't say anything. He just stared at me as I rang up his items and told him the total. He handed me a wad of sweaty, crumpled bills that he pulled out of his pocket. I gingerly put them in the register and gave him his change. I handed him his bags, and he stared at me some more, and then left. I washed my hands and then continued on with my day. I had forgotten all about him until a week later. He shows up at my job at the taco place with a yellow plastic bag from the general store. He had obviously gone there first, and then came to the taco place looking for me. For once we were slow at the taco place. He called me over to the counter. "I know your mom," he said. I honestly didn't doubt that. My mom was into some heavy shit back then, and this guy seemed to be a tweaker. Suddenly he pulls out an envelope full of $20 bills and throws it on the counter, smiling. He backs away towards the door, not saying anything else. "What's this for?" He shrugs and says, "I want to help you guys out." I take the money and look at it. I then test it with the pens we have by the registers. It was all real. He had actually given me a wad of cash that came out to be $500. Don't get me wrong, I was grateful, but I was also sketched the fuck out. After my shift, I walked over to the police department, which also was in the same lot as my other two jobs. I rang the intercom and they eventually sent out 2 police officers. I explained the situation. They didn't really take me seriously. They thought I was being some paranoid girl trying to friend zone some nice guy. They told me that there wasn't anything he had done wrong, and that money was mine. I had been willing to give up the money as evidence in case it was stolen or obtained due to selling heavy drugs. The guy did claim he knew my mom. That of course turned out to be a lie. The cops left and nothing more came of it. I had put the incident behind me until I saw him again. It was at the store, and I was ringing him up. This time, instead of staring and saying nothing, he asked me for my phone number. Now guys, never hit on a girl who works in customer service. She is obligated to be polite to you, but that doesn't mean she likes you just because she's being nice. Plus, it's an extremely uncomfortable situation to be in. Anyway, I came up with the first excuse I could. I don't have a phone. He didn't even blink. He just went from standing there to suddenly leaning over the register and growling in my face. "What's the matter? You don't like me? You think you're too good for me? I gave you all that money. What's wrong with you?" I took several steps back. What the actual fuck? Then I heard my boss call my name from across the store, asking me if I could help her adjust some shelves. The guy then walked off and left the store. I took a moment to call my boyfriend and have him come pick me up. At the end of my shift, I realized that was good thinking on my part, because the guy was standing outside the store smoking a cigarette and waiting for me. After that, I have my boyfriend pick me up and drop me off every day until I finally get a vehicle to drive to work. Later on, everyone at the taco place was talking about a stabbing that happened last night. They told me that the guy waited under someone's car while wearing a blindfold. Once they were about to open their door, this fucker stabs them in the ankle and slides out from under the car. I guess he didn't realize that there were other people in the same parking lot, because as soon as he saw them, he took off running. A few days later, I went into my second job, and my supervisor, who had been with me the night the creep was waiting for me, showed me a picture in the newspaper and an article. A few towns over, this guy had stabbed someone else, but he had actually killed them this time. He stabbed a woman 32 times before he was arrested on site. He hadn't seen anyone around this time with his blindfold. My guess is that there was enough light that he could make out the outlines of people the first time, but the second time, he chose a darker, more secluded location. So lucky for me, I didn't become a victim of this creep, but it's just scary to think that someone this crazy actually lived in the same town as me. It's really something else when you wonder about how many killers or would-be killers you might come across.
There's always a reason to be afraid.